Alors, je crois que nous pourrons commencer. I do believe we'll be able to start about now, so please find a seat. Trouvez vos sièges tranquillement. J'entends dire que c'est la première très grande conférence internationale pour plusieurs d'entre nous. It's the first very big conference, international conference for a lot of us here after the mayhem of the last couple of years, après toutes les troubles des 2 dernières années. Alors, profitons-en. J'aimerais vous entendre faire du bruit pour célébrer le fait qu'on est enfin tout le monde ensemble. Let's make a lot of noise to celebrate the fact that we are all together, finally. Qui parle de grands chamboulements dans les dernières années, évidemment, parle de comment ça a changé nos perspectives et nos stratégies. I will be moving in English later on, just to let you guys know. I'll just do the introduction in French, and then I'll be moving on mainly in English for the conversations. Donc, dans les dernières années, on a été confrontés à des changements considérables permettant la remise en question de nos modes de vie, nos perspectives et nos stratégies. De nouveaux concepts ont émergé, tandis que d'autres ont évolué au sein de cet écosystème ébranlé. Des mots et des concepts s'affrontent tels que tournée et circulation, succès et réussite, différentes notions de territoire ou de niche, diversité, pluralité, différentes notions d'écologie, œuvres d'artistes, interprètes et d'auteurs, tournée continentale ou outre-mer. Ces nouvelles tendances et compréhensions influencent-elles la façon dont nous pensons nos stratégies et nos plans? Comment s'inscrire dans une perspective d'inclusivité et de durabilité tout en prenant soin de notre santé et de notre écosystème? Bref, un thème relativement léger à aborder, n'est-ce pas? Pas large du tout. Mais avec nos panélistes, on a trouvé le moyen de trouver quelques points d'ancrage dans cette très grande réflexion. Et je vous les présente sans plus tarder pour leur laisser le plancher. Alors, tout d'abord, complètement à l'extrémité, on a Clotilde Cardinal, qui est directrice de la programmation à la Société de la Place des Arts de Montréal. Ici, juste à côté de moi, on a Francesc Casadesús, qui est directeur du Festival de Barcelone, le Festival grec de Barcelone, biggest festival in Spain. We have Q Choi, who's artistic director of Seoul Performing Arts Festival, as well as creative director at Performing Arts Market in Seoul. And finally, Cindy Huang. She is the founder and president of Impulse Creative and programmer at ITHRA. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much. Alors, I will start with the person that is furthest from... Oh, I'll start by introducing myself. I completely forgot. Where are my manners? Kwe ndio aweti ashkenonia yes wendat endi yanyonia ihwahitio kuta shalbender yatsi jodyahi indare. So I just introduced myself in Wendat. I am myself an indigenous artist from this region here, from this island of Montreal, also known as Jojage and Muniang. I'm really happy to be with you all today, this morning, and I'm really glad that I get to have this wonderful conversation with these people over here. So without further ado, let's jump right in, and I'll throw it first to Clotilde Cardinal. We were having a very interesting conversation this morning, and I guess we could sum it up by, can we talk about a new normal?
Un, deux? Yeah, okay. If we can talk about the new normal. First, I'd like to thank CINARS to give me the chance to kick out this conference. I realize this conference is very important for every people in the room because it's like it has mentioned by Charles as a moment for some of you, the first time you attend a conference after 30 years of a strange period, may I say. We all agree together to be very optimistic, so just put this on the table right now. But as you know, we all face huge challenges. But when you face challenges in your life, you might be seeing them as opportunities, and this is the way we're gonna start this conversation. So about the new normal, definitely it's not anymore normal, and I think it's after these major transformation we all face globally, um, the arts has been impacted as every other sectors of economy and our lives. So no, it's not going to be a new normal, but I really believe that arts are extremely and more than ever important in our lives, because it can be seen as a agent of transformation. And for this reason, I really believe and I'm convinced that arts should stay part of our lives, and everyone in the room are, I'm sure, convinced of that and work very hard to attain this objective. So back to your question, I think no, it's not anymore normal. And I back to the theme of this panel, new perspective. I won't. I'm not here to celebrate what we've made with a lot of effort in the past 30 months, but certainly I'd like to share with you where I'm standing right now in a position of power. Maybe some of you maybe probably didn't know, but I'm working for the government of Quebec, and Place des Arts is one of it's the biggest art complex in Canada. Regarding to the number of seats we work with. And I hope some of you will have a chance to go to Place des Arts while you are in Montreal, including next weekend. I'm organizing an Indigenous open mic. It's free for everyone. Is invited to come. So let me share and start with this. And I do believe here we have international guests with us, and I'm excited to hear what they have to propose. The new perspective and strategy I'd like to put on the table right now, and to really engage, connect, and build relevance, and restart this mobility or touring we refer to, and stay pertinent for the public, is really to my point of view, it's continuing to supporting and helping the ecology of production for more pertinent and attractive content in performing arts. And one we could also develop later what I'm talking about more pertinent, because as a presenter, I put myself as a presenter. I'm responsible of not only the production side, the creation side, the artist, their needs and preoccupation, but also I put my hat, and I'm also preoccupied by the public, which is the group for whom we're doing all of this. Another strategy, actually, I'm really believe in, it's really remodeling our partnership with the communities, and more support the idea of a co-creation. I could give you more example later of what I'm thinking about this idea of a co-creation, and be more and more listening to the communities, to the underprivileged communities, to the one who don't have access to education, to the one who doesn't really has the art yet in their lives and think this is more than important than everything, exact, etc., etc. And at Place des Arts, we really engage in that. And during the pandemic, instead, while we were seeing our revenues, going that way, we continue to more and more extend our hands to these underprivileged communities. And I think it's really important, and this is more than ever important, because we have to keep in our mind that we do what we do is service public services. Sorry. And last and not the least, the third strategy and perspective I would suggest to the floor is mutualization. I think we will probably in the future do more together, add things, and to make sure we will have more impact. We're going to be more relevant, we're going to be more pertinent, and this is artist, presenter, artist, and artist public. So mutualization, continue to think big, but also to think how we can achieve this, maybe take more time to achieve what we want. And it goes through dialogues, conversation, and instead of again going the speed of the Renaissance years we faced before the pandemic, because I call these years before pandemic renaissance on my side because everything went so fast. We were, it was the golden age of the art somehow. I'm joking a little bit, but everything was normal. So now this new normal, we will have to do more mutualization and also think like modernization and agility in all senses to fight the uncertainty. So I'm sorry to have taken so much time. So
It's quite all right.
okay, so and I'd like to develop later on what what we call the pertinent cultural rights, etc., etc. So later I'll talk later
Absolutely,
about this.
and that is definitely one of the directions we'll be going into. Believe me, I throw it to Q Choi because you've mentioned a couple of really interesting things about co-creation and getting in touch with the communities and making sure that you're listening to your public and you're creating a true relationship, a back and forth relationship, so to speak. And I believe Q Choi, this is something that is important for you as well. Where you were talking about new narratives when we had our quick conversations this morning, and you do. Uh, you do have thoughts on locality and translocality and how we can better interact with our communities. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject, and also at the same time explaining how everything has changed so much. What is your new normal?
Oh, okay. There's a German electronic alternative music group called Enigma in 90s. I'm not sure how many people know about that. They have songs called Odyssey of the Mind. Said that there are something changed, but nothing changed. There are still changes. So I think for me, new normal is how we're responding to changes. Many people talking about new reality. Reality and after pandemic, what happened, something new. So new normal for me, same like a new reality, how we responding what changing in our society, and also what does that mean, the role of art as a festival director and also international platform. So new normal for me, responding the society change, the role of art changing. So finding different perspective, that's for me new normal. Shortly, I said. You mentioned about new narratives. So as a festival director, and the big question is, what is a sort of my role as a festival director, responsibility or role of festival, function of a festival? So we thought about after pandemic, there are, Francis mentioned cultural rights, human rights, and also diversity, inclusion, so important. So how can we share this important urgency rather than, a sort of issue fighter, how we proceed to actually share with the audience, artists together. So that's why, one of my criteria direction for next 5 years called the new narratives, meaning is how we share unheard voice or less heard voice, which means there's a big, I'm talking about Korean cultural context, is a big sort of less heard voice about LGBT, also the aging people and the disabled people, and a big after Me Too movement. There's a big sort of movement about feminism of human right. So important thing is how we share those artist voice, but important is who tell the story also important. It's not just as a topic. So by whom will tell the new narratives. That's a sort of important part for me. Yeah.
And it's fun because it resonates also with what Clotilde was saying. There's a sort of golden age that happened. There's a revolution that happened in our fields where we rethought a lot of things. Maybe the pandemic was good in that sense because we had to scale down and then go like, okay, I have time to think about it now. And cultural rights is something, Frances, that is very important for you as well. It's something that you wanted to broach in this conversation. What is your new normal in terms of how we develop these relationships and how we make sure that voices less heard are heard and heard in a proper way?
Hello? See, yes, it's funny because we come from different parts of the world, but in a way, I agree with most of the things you've said. one of the things that I made me very strong now is that I think that culture is essential, and we were, I think, the first festival in Europe that happened even in 2020. So we really felt that what we were doing was very important. So that gave me a lot of strength to face whatever comes up in the future. Um, Having said that, what I think is that if we look at more than the pandemic, we look at the 20th century. It was the century of education, health. But I think the 21st century has to be the health, the century of democratization, of the evolution of um, equalities, and a century where we have to look at inequalities in a way, and culture has to play an important role on that. I think culture has to do with social cohesion, has to do with creativity, has to do with international dialogue, and that's something that it's really important. However we construct what is to come, I think this is very important. I say cultural rights because I think I know Canada is kind of very strong on that intellectual discourse about cultural rights, probably more than Europe so far. But now I work for the city, and this is the base for most of the political culture that is going to take place in the next years in the city of Barcelona. So, and we are looking more than into like maybe excellence, I would say. I think looking at postal codes is more important than looking at heritage in a way.
Looking at postal codes is more because they all have their very distinct particularities and their different cultures. Like postal codes are going to be, it's going to be that niche to a certain extent. It's really interesting to think about it in this way. And if we go in a more global sort of perspective, Cindy, you represent many countries in the oh my gosh, how could we define that area? South Asian and an Arab world. And you were mentioning something that was really interesting, because perspective on cultural issues is can be defined by privilege in certain cases, and privilege is not going to take you in the same direction. So how do we broach that? What's the new normal from that perspective now that we're reopening and we're going again to these different places and trying to share culture as much as possible? What do we have to keep in mind when we're coming in with our cultural perspective and we're maybe not confronted, but we have to create mixicity with somebody else's cultural perspective?
I just want to say thank you first to CINARS for putting me on this panel with these esteemed colleagues, and to thank all of you guys for being here at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's so great to see all of you after so long. I almost cried yesterday when I came in, just seeing so many beautiful faces. So thank you again for being here. I think this idea of new normal really actually hit me a lot earlier. I'm an American. I grew up in New York City, lived in LA. Then from LA, I moved to Saudi Arabia, and that's where I currently live. I've been living there now for 7.5 years. Being in a cultural service, working with artists in the cultural industry for so long, moving to Saudi Arabia in 2015 was a shock in my system. It was literally a cultural desert. You know, when I first arrived, music was not allowed. Public performances was not allowed. There was no places where I can buy tickets to see a performance, or even movie theaters. Movie theaters doesn't even exist. So that was a huge shock in my system, but that also gave me, I needed to think like, oh my God, this is a part of the world I have never been exposed to, which is like what we talked about the idea of cultural privilege. We are sitting in a position where most of us have access to our business since we were growing up. And I all of a sudden, I step into a country where it's a country that's completely closed off, that have absolutely no access to any of the stuff that we're talking about. So the country opened up in 2018 when they created the Ministry of Culture. The idea of cultural right is slightly different with their mission. Their mission is to create a cultural identity, because kids in Saudi Arabia and in the region grew up watching American television, watching Hollywood movies, listening to hip hop music, listening to Beyonce, listening to Mariah Carey. So there is actually inherently a problem also, is like how their mission really is to help the next generation hold on to their Arab identity. in Saudi, I'll speak for Saudi, but also in the region as itself. It's like, who are we as Arabs? Who are we as Saudis? And that's their mission, but also to continue to connect them and to offer the country an opportunity to see the best work internationally. So some of the languages that we talk about sustainability, about green mobility, it's not there yet because they're completely building an infrastructure from ground up. Aside from working with artists and also pre-pandemic, because arriving there, I also had to start thinking about what can I do to change my relationships with the artists that I'm representing and that I'm working with. So in 2018, when I created my company, I left out any of the word management agency in my company name because I knew that kind of model that we're so used to already isn't sustainable. So actually, when the pandemic hit, I was actually we all suffered. But in back of my mind, I felt it was a really, really great opportunity that forces us to get out of our butts and to start thinking and doing things differently. I think it was really a catalyst for us to force us to already start thinking differently. I think it was all about to happen anyways. All of this, from technology to economy to geopolitical, whatever, all of these terms we use, that's about to happen. But I think the pandemic is a way for it basically got our butts off our seats. Because I think we were for so long, like you had said, in this Renaissance period, we were just celebrating in our own success that we completely forgot how to think forward and how to plan for the next steps. And we were doing things the same way over and over again. So for me, it's not about a new normal. I don't really like that term per se, but it's about how to be adaptable and how do we do things constantly, because we are in the creative industry. We have to constantly think creatively. We keep forgetting that. If we don't think creatively, we're not gonna be creative and make the next great work. And that's the thing. So I think for me, it's always been in the back of my mind. Like I force myself to and challenge myself to think differently all the time because I'm working in such different contexts.
It's something interesting that you're bringing forward here is the fact that you're rethinking how you do things forces you to rethink what your responsibilities are, forces you to rethink how you're going to interact both with the publics you're trying to reach and the artists that you're representing. How have your responsibilities, responsibilities, have changed? What new tasks have you given yourselves, or what are things that you don't do anymore, you don't need to do anymore because it's dépassé? Now it's time to focus on new responsibilities. There's new priorities to take into account.
I would like to ask here at the room, is there a festival or a company that does not have a sustainability plan? That does not have a plan to how to reduce the ecological impact, how to deal with CO2, with carbon, and so on. Everybody needs to have that, and if not, in the next 20 years, for sure.
I would. Of course, we do have as a government responsibility, but I totally share what you've said, and I'll go back to what is. I really like what Cindy just said about be creative and more agile for the future, and I think the arts milieu should show how more than ever other milieu how to rethink the future. And back to your question, Cesc, I think it is extremely important, and it links to your team. I mean, yeah, sustainability is having some sustainability mindset is actually something you can miss. It's like you are in the solution or you against the solution. It's the immobility cannot be an option from my point of view. So, of course, it affects our milieu to think this, but it also, as I mentioned before, can be an opportunities because I think, and I'm not saying any orientation for artistic vision, but artists can be extremely agent of transformation for a sustainability plan. Yeah, and may I say that from our point of view, this sustainability plan also is something horizontal and should be everywhere in our society, but it's also include from our point of view what we call the DEI, so the diversity, equity, inclusion, and may I say A for I also include indigenous people and disabled people. And so I like to say that for me, artists cannot be, artists, us, I'm not putting the responsibility on the artist's shoulder only, us as a milieu cannot be inactive in that sense. So we should think about it and think differently and really think how can we be a difference, how we do a difference by choosing artists, by decide to mutualize in our tours, by thinking about green carbon, etc., etc. So I won't give you a lots of idea. I'm sure this is everywhere, but certainly in the creation, I would like to see more and more in the future that kind of a reflection. Just give you an example. We have a small exhibition room at Place des Arts, and I started a partnership with the Phi Center, the Centre Phi. And today, Myriam Achar and we have decided to invite an artist who has, with a work called As Water Falls, because this artist was preoccupied by the fact that water is not anymore. Water is everywhere in Quebec. I mean, in Canada, we have tons of lakes and we're surrounded by ocean. But in other places in the world, water is certainly an issue, and everyone in the world should have access to water. It's a priority. It's like having food. So, but because this artist has this thing in mind, we decide, both Myriam and I, to choose this artist. And this is just an example, but definitely I agree on what you just said. And I pass the microphone. I won't.
I think
my colleagues, esteemed colleague.
For me, is the most important responding. Your question is what art can do. When we think about climate crisis, but more climate justice, and so important thing is sort of the role of artist and what art can do. So it's one perspective at the festival. I just started this year. How artwork can sort of make audience rethinking, and also not also audience, but as well as for artists and producers, festival organizers. So big sort of challenging different agenda works on climate crisis. So commissioning, working with those works. At the same time, also important is it's very difficult. Can artwork relate to environmental crisis? Can be propaganda, can be some sort of education work. Is how it can be more ethical, but at the same time, how can it be artistic? So this is a big question for us. Is then at the same time we are rethinking internationality, but before was really the excellence, big production, the huge set. How we actually rethinking internationality, working with local artists, local community, with the international artists. That does not mean we work only with domestic Korean company, Asian company. So it's a big question is rethinking so internationality. So at the same time, we started two years research program, Next Mobility. When we program international production, what will be different way? I can elaborate a little bit later. And then last one at the responding, what actually we can do, reduce, carbons. So less printing, less advertising on the street. Things actually, there are a lot of things so we can sort of practice step by step rather than whole. We don't feel, the important thing is when we make artists and audience feel guilty, because of climate justice, that actually more negative effect rather than about rethinking about environmental crisis. So that's sort of what I would like to share. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, Cindy, you want to jump in because we've had conversations about this as well. Also about how do we perceive touring from that
Yeah.
perspective? Because there's a paradox that comes in line when...
Right. Yeah. I mean, just so my other hat is as a programmer, which I recently took on in Saudi Arabia at a theater called Ithra, and it's the only theater in the entire kingdom. It's built by Aramco, which is the largest oil and gas, which seems very oxymoron that oil and gas has built a cultural center. Oil and gas is probably the most non-environmental industry. And in the new team, you know, we are really not there yet to talk about so much of the sustainability of what we're talking about here. But what we are doing as a new team is that previously companies come in, they ask for a fee, no negotiation, they said yes, and it's like 1 or 2 performances. That is absolutely not sustainable. That is where we're trying to start now. So as a new team, as a programming, we're looking at how do we create partnership with our region? And that's our number one really right now is we can only do baby steps, right? Because we're fighting a bigger system here, working with a bigger system. And that's one thing we're doing is that the institution is trying to avoid just flying in someone from far away, you know, and just say you're here for 2 days and you get to go home. And that is one thing that we're looking at, and we're also pushing the regions and talking very actively to regions in our neighbors to talk about, you know, future collaborations from co-producing and co-commissioning as well, but also as a way to develop regional artists. You know, at the end of the day, for culture to thrive, you have to give an artist a chance to have a voice. And I'm working in a region where artists never really had a voice. They had to leave the country to produce their art. So that's another fundamental sustainability model that we're all trying to grapple with. And it comes down again is the relationship, right? We talk about here is like a few artists are here, but you know, at the end of the day, it's the artist that's standing on the stage, and we have to take very good care as to how do we create relationships with them that are not transactional. We've been in a model of very transactional relationship for a really long time, and we have to be mindful that culture is not transactional. It has to be relationship. It has to be long term.
Absolutely.
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
Just picking up some of the words. The one you said, I think in mobility is not an option. And I think working locally is also not an option, or at least for this room, we have to be aware of how important it is to work internationally. Even if we live in the century of paradox, you said, yes, this is a paradox, but we have to be international. It's very important for the arts. I have a quote from a traveler from the 14th century, like a Spanish traveler that went to Arab countries, and he said, when you travel, first you become speakless, but then when you arrive home, you are storyteller. So storytelling is very important for our job, and I think we have to keep telling stories, and that stories, maybe a little drop can make big changes. So, and things, that's our mission. So do not forget that we have to still work internationally and bring to our countries whatever we think is needed and can make big transformations.
But then there's a relationship between who do we invite to our festivals, who do we invite to our respective places, and there are ways of going about it that are changing right now. We were having discussion earlier today. Do you license the rights to a particular production, or do you bring in a whole company? At one point, do you believe that it becomes more important to bring in the whole company to do their art in your festival, or at one point do you say like, well, we're going to license it because it's going to be less ecologically, there will be less ecological impact? Or are there other solutions like that allow us to still travel, to still have access to cultural manifestations from around the world, but keeping in mind the impact it's going to have on our on the ecology?
I recently was talking to the producer of Akram Khan, and this was at a conference in Singapore 2 weeks ago, and he's saying for their new production Jungle Book, trying to think about the environment. What they're trying to do is, as you talked about, is the licensing model, kind of what musicals were doing out, in Asia for a long time, and is to allow a programmer, a festival, a theater to license the piece. And what they'll do is they'll come, maybe the core 3 creative team from Akram's company to come out and to train and to cast the show locally. And that was a conversation that he was talking about, which they want to explore. I think there's also monetary consideration, whether that's actually, whether that may be financially more viable, or is it, more viable to just bring the whole entire company out there. But even at PAMS, earlier in September, some of the projects were really interesting that, even artists are starting to think about, how do I create more engagement and more build relationships with communities that I'm going to? There was a project we saw, and Q knows about this. She's a Chinese actor and dramaturg, and the project is to talk about the value of arts in a courtroom style, and all of the participants are sourced locally, which means all this, it all works. Now you're getting very different narratives really from the audiences directly, and I thought that was really interesting. It's going to be a longer process to create, but you're spending more time locally in that city interviewing the people, the real people that may or may not be actually engaging with arts. So I think from a lot of artists' perspective, it'll be nice to also hear more from artists what they are thinking. We as programmers, as agents, managers, however you want to call it, we talk about it, but I think it's also important to have conversations with artists and hear what they have to say, because I do think they are also thinking about it that way. And there are more established artists who also don't want to travel this kind of rigorous schedules that they've done before. Because it's like, they wake up, they have no idea where they are. Like, they're literally just going from hotel room to hotel room. So I think it's important to hear from them as well.
There was a thought also about the idea of privilege. There are places in the world where artists will not have a chance to be known or to be talked about or celebrated unless they find a way to be invited to bigger festivals. Where do we not draw the line, because it's not about lines, what's right and wrong, but where do we find the correct balance between making sure that we are still keeping as open as possible to artists coming from less privileged places in the world, coming to big festivals, and also balancing out the fact that when you have a very big production coming into your festival, it is impactful, so you have to find ways to make it maybe a little bit less impactful. What are the thoughts around that?
It's not an easy one, but maybe I could add that I like to say, like Cesc and I, we're bouncing. So say, think locally but act, or think globally but act globally, something like that. So your question was in 2 sections. So I think the idea of working with the communities, the idea of this co-creation, I love to say working by a long table. So listening to them, and it's not only about showing them what is the arts, but a real conversation of them, and how these voices should have access to an international perspective is they won't have. It's not possible statistically. It's not true that everyone should travel, but the most not talented but pertinent one will have access to these possibilities through at first this first gesture we will do as presenter and festivals and producer to at least not think that arts is just this, but also can include other voices. And this is really important, actually, especially after the pandemic. So I'd like to say that we have to do as much possible actions to include everyone, and it goes through different strategies. I can give you some we have at Plaza, but I won't take too much time on that. But really, it certainly goes through education as well, because it's not a 2 years plan. It's really a transformation we're talking about in the future. And back to your question of the international, I think when we host international, it's as we have the responsibility to do whatever we can, and I'm sure our artists are more than willing most of the time to do that. More if we host some artists in our region, town, festivals, complex venue, we have to make sure these artists will make connection with our community in different ways, through master classes, through conference, to having a meet and greet with students, blah, blah, blah. So all this, because just take advantage of the time. Time became something completely different during the pandemic. We suddenly had a lot of time. But now, and we all have celebrate this, and we all have say to ourselves, oh, finally I'll have much more time and I won't go back to the speed I faced before, but look at what we actually are living. It's again, it's a kind of velocity. So think about this, and if we have the possibility of working in the arts, we have to make everything possible that the time we have with an artist should be shared with as maximum as possible of people. And this is a responsibility I have as a presenter. Yeah.
The topic is becoming too big, even for a panel of 1 hour. So I think, I just underline what you say. I think listening is very important. I think we have to take care of there's not a new type of colonialism. I think this word hasn't been in the room yet, but I think sometimes bringing companies from different parts of the world can be a type of colonialism, because I see sometimes artists changing what they want to do because they have to please a group of European organizers, for example. This is not what should happen. So we have to be careful how we listen to the voices and that we present the voices as they are, or what they can bring to us. And also, I think as presenters, we don't have to be on the first role. We have to be also in the back and giving the voice to the artist, because it's not about, oh, I brought this, click, 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 click. I have this artist in my program. It's about what is relevant for my country, for my situation, and how can we make that our auditoriums are as plural as possible. At least we have to work on the diversity also of the audience that is coming to our festivals.
At the same time, we have to be very honest, realistic way. Are we really doing that? Because a certain limited budget and also a certain limited audience taste. It's a difficult question. Yes, I totally agree. I studied in Korea, also in London, also a lot of works is Europe. When I see my program, there's a big imbalance between Asian and Arab and Europe. So much more European work, and including here Canadian works, I mean things, Quebec, I have to say, politically. But so how can we really, in a realistic way, for me, a platform at working as a PAMS, we can provide it those different opportunity, establish the artists, emerging artists, different continent, different area. But I can't do that at the festival, because clearly there is a certain limited budget and human resources and things. So, but for me, it's before my 30 years work is a cross-cultural, sharing different culture, but I am pretty much, as a festival director, less interested in it, more interested in about a kind of transnational approach, which means we are suffering, we are questioning same question all over the world about, I mentioned about disability, genders, feminism, and then aging things. So though I live in Korea, but in how the like a Quebec, the artist is thinking. So clearly realistic way, even though you want to show or include all the world, but it's impossible for me. I mean, so transnational way, how we share a global context with the locality, with the audience and artists. That's sort of the way at the festival. But having said that, there is a missing point. So strategically, there's a big gap is Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. At the festival, how we sort of reduce those imbalance. Southeast Asian colleagues has different resources. They have more artists, they have human resources. Northeast Asia had the funding, and we share a different way of collaboration rather than same way you prepare 50, I prepare 50, like that. Also big sort of gap about Arab, Middle East, and then Islamic culture is not introduced at all. So those areas we strategically introduce cultural background, including, but most other things is more how the festival showed our perspective in a transnational way. That's sort of practically at the festival we are proceed.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, and also just I beg to question too, is it realistic, right? Is it very realistic to get companies all around the world? I mean, I talk to my artists I work with all the time, and I say, you have to have a reality check. Artists is up to everyone's perspectives of likes and don't likes. It's not, it's like food. Everyone has their flavors, has their taste for what's good and what's not good. So everyone's gonna like something that is not gonna be like the elsewhere. And so I tell artists all the time, because I get artists who says, I wanna come out to the Middle East, I wanna come out to Asia and tour, and I say to them, you have to look at at the end of the day, I say it starts with the quality of your work first and whether it resonates with the regions you want to go to. It is okay that you are not traveling to that part of the world. Not every artist is gonna make it and be big around the globe. That is just not possible. You can count with maybe 10 fingers how many people can do that, right? So that's one thing I talk to my artists all the time. What are you trying to say artistically? What is your creative, artistic vision, and what is your artistic voice? That's the most important first. Saying to you, I said, do not try to change your work because you want to accommodate a specific market. And this is also going back to this transactional relationship that we have built already. And that's what's creating some of these little really, bad habits or cycles that making artists say, I can change this, I can change that. I'm working in 2 markets that, we can have another conversation later, but it's about also cultural sensitivities and censorship. And I myself representing the artists, I have to also protect them and say, when you're saying I have to check this box and say, I have to change this, I have to be like, no, you can't, because now that's changing the entire integrity of this entire work. But vice versa, I tell artists, I said, don't change it because of this. Don't try to change your work because you're trying to fit into the market. You have to stay true to who you are. And if this true work really only resonate with North America, that's okay. Be the best in North America. It's okay that you're not across the pond on the other side. I think we need to have those realistic conversations too, as we are trying to exchange and hopefully get tours booked and programmers are trying to program. But again, it's that idea of curiosity too, right? Those places need to be heard, but how can we do it in a holistic way, like you're saying? Maybe it's not the biggest names, but you're having them come in, and I'm spending 2 weeks really engaging with a community, and then now they get to know a part of the world that they may not know about.
It's interesting because you get a sense that where we're moving towards, and you were talking about the postal codes earlier on, saying like now we're very fragmented. We have the opportunity to going for things that are very niche, and you know you're going to have a target audience for something very specific. Has that changed for you as well? Is that an added responsibility, or is it something? Is it seen as an opportunity to say like I can fragment my public and my audience and say like, I'll find the community that's going to be the right fit for you. So you're going to come in and you'll stay, you'll experience, and you'll allow them to experience something that they wouldn't otherwise have experienced. Is that, how does that change your responsibilities as programmers, as
You know, for me, putting down my programming hat now, because I'm responsible for the music, and I just put in, you know, a season for 23, and it is about looking at who my audiences are. My audience is a makeup of Saudis, other Arab nations that's living in Saudi, plus a Western expat community. And so you have a very, very diverse community there. And so when I'm programming, I'm also thinking about, well, all these artists are thinking, all these audiences that they've seen are all Western. All the programming that has been done is completely Western programming since the theater opened in 2018. So what I'm trying to do is, how do I allow the Saudi Arab audiences feel a sense of identity, that they can see themselves on that stage? So that's where I'm thinking. But also at the same time, introduce them to a world of culture in the Western world that they've might not have had a chance to see. So now that's a really tough balance. How do I program that? Right? And it's finding the right artists doing those kind of work. How do I say, can inviting companies come in and say, can you collaborate with the local Saudi artists? Because they need to say, oh, I see myself on that stage. That's where representation is coming from. You know, all of this, I mean, as an Asian American growing up in the United States, I don't see myself on TV. I don't see myself on stage. So I'm very cognizant of that now that I'm there at a theater where all they've done is Western programming since they've opened. And kind of like to what Q is saying too, right? Those are some of the more regional, more local issues that we have to address first.
I'd like to jump on. Oh, sorry, go.
Okay. When we talk about responsibility, I mean, in terms of audience, I'm thinking about rather than who are the festival audience. At the same time, we have to think about who were not festival audience, because so that's also I believe is festival responsibility. Meaning is when we talk about this sort of new narrative agenda, we believe it's really hard to sell the ticket because of small numbers of audience. So yes, it is true. When we think about, there's a production called Woman on Earth about feminism, SF Noble, is men one by one disappear in the because of violence. Men hate, they don't want to buy a ticket and they feel very uncomfortable. And when we talk about climate crisis, so people think, oh, is this an education program? Is this a sort of artistic program? A lot of questions. So as a festival director, how are we sort of providing the audience feel it, we're not educating, with art, we are suggesting or questioning artistically. So it's important thing is those were not the festival audience, how we develop the new audience, that perspective. So we provided about workshop festival with the scientist and the philosopher, has a 2 days workshop that developed. And also festival is always in October, but how we sort of springtime, summertime, we connect with the audience. So rather than one event, so rethinking. This year I just started a new work is art and accessibility to providing about disabled audiences. So 7 production providing sign language and also the subtitle and a different way of audio description things. So important thing is the responsibility is for me is sort of rethinking about those audience who were not before. That's sort of important questions.
It's like a sort of success bias. If your audience is always present, you figure, okay, so I'm doing that right, and then you forget that there are audiences that could be there that are not. And we go back to the idea of being in communication, constant communication with the communities around you, and making sure that you know what they also need, not just would like to see, but what they might need, in creating these very strong relationships. I'll just pass it on to Francis first, but I will go back to you because you wanted to talk. But or else, there you go. Please, Clotilde.
Please, just we're Quebec. We're very polite people. Go.
No. I mean, it's early in the morning. I have jet lag. I have lots of things in my mind, so I'll probably not be very coherent now. No, just reacting. There's lots of ways to give the voice to the artist, and I like how the conversation is just approaching the artists, how the artists work, what is creativity. I like that. I don't know if that's the direction, but I like that. And also audiences, in a way. I think these are the two topics that we didn't touch much. But at the level of artists, I think I said that before. I think there's a problem with the way we constructed the model of big theaters and the number of audiences. I think that there's an issue and a problem about the future. Are we going to continue with that long seasons, lots of audience, or are we going to be more creative in terms of production? I mean, now one of the most successful productions is this Sun and Sea from these Lithuanian girls, which is like long duration performance where people are just wandering around. So there's new models of performances that are coming up, festivals in rural areas, festivals like in special places. Me, myself, also I'm thinking on a program for our festival, which will take into account different spaces, like traveling to a very, like special place will be like the whole experience of the performance, not only 1 hour performance. Before, all studies discuss about art as a social event. I think now it's more like a personal event of experience. I'm very incoherent now. I'm going in another direction, but I think that's like something that resonates in my mind, and how to address programming in the future as an experience for different audiences in different places, getting closer to the people instead of them going to the temple of art. I think that's one direction, maybe. And I think for that we need the artist. We need to see how we can impulse or give space or give connections or give new ideas to the artists, so this creativity can take place, more or less.
We decide to be optimistic on that panel, so we keep this optimistic mindset. I just want to back to the audience issues. I'd like to, as I had the chance to work with many partners, festivals, producers, residence company, classical models to very hedgy ones. So I just want to add that actually effectively the public is a real issue right now. Pandemic has, really changed the cards. And so I know everyone, every partner with whom I'm working, festivals, series, resident, are thinking very hardly actually of how they can be more pertinent and how they can reach public. Definitely there was parts of the public who decide to put other priorities in their lives for many good reasons. We have to think about the new generation more carefully, because everyone knows that the consumption of these generation are more and more hybrid and go through the digital, etc., etc. So back to the artists' voices, they should think about being more and more listening to issues, and how we will all together, presenters and artists, will go through that big waves, because it's certainly an issue. I'm actually in a process of strategic planning at Place des Arts, and I have a lot of the statistic in my mind, and I can certainly testimony that it's going to be a big wave. But another side of my mind is thinking that we have, as a milieu, to be part of these big waves. It's going to be tough, but we necessarily have to see it as an opportunity to more and more reinforce the fact that we are extremely important. And some of my colleagues have mentioned the social cohesion. I think it's you, Cesc. And I'd like that, because arts actually in the world would definitely be an important component of the social cohesion. And this for me is made some sun in the clouds. Sorry to be again without coffee, so poetic this morning.
It's quite all right.
Where's the coffee?
If you'll allow, I'll allow another 3 minutes just to finish off, because I think we have people who want to bounce off of that thought, and then I'd love to open the floor for people to ask questions. I got a couple of gasps, and I felt people leaning in a couple of times. So I think we have people who would like to interact with you, ask questions, or bounce off of some ideas. So please go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I have to be very honest. I mean, this time in CINARS, compared to we see the before BC, before COVID, I feel like a little bit overwhelmed compared to last two. This is my third time. I mean, I kept questioning about why is it that is a new normal, because I couldn't focus on conversation with artists, each person 10 minutes. So I couldn't follow up. There are so many things is happening, so many things to see. So really, as I mentioned about responsibility, this is an international platform. So we're questioning about really what is the internationality in the art. So we have a research about 2 years is the next mobility, how pandemic happened, borders closed again, can we mobilize again? I mean, things. So, many people know about concept touring ways, about, the scores and also protocol, travel, working with the local community artists there. So we're thinking about different format. Clearly, like when we say the Akram Khan on the stage, that's a fantastic, because Akram Khan is on the stage. So I don't mean it's a classic touring cannot, valid anymore, but how we really rethinking different format of international touring or mobility. So at the same time, we had a big question about digital physical hybrid. Again, many people hate technology, but at the same time, it's not technology substitute of the live art. It's different. And so how we making hybrid, also digital mobility. At the same time, this year we did a conference of absent Rimini protocol in terms of green mobility way, call people, travel, but 8 months locally producing together. So really one of this topic is a new perspective and a responsibility as a festival programmer or a PAMS platform maker. How we have to really think about new perspective. That's sort of I drew the question to you and to me.
Just a very simple question. I'm so happy to be here and to see so many friends. And I think meeting people is essential to our identity as humankind. So this we cannot change. It's very important. Just even hugging people, saying hello, can make thousands of projects in the future. And I think that that's what we need, bring humanity back to the world.
And also, as security is becoming more and more an issue in the world, and we see countries more and more be more red-wing, especially today, maybe in the United States, we cross our finger. And I'd like to say that international links and international exchange is more and more important. So continue to trying to have that dialogue is more than informed. It's an international platform. Take this opportunity, rebuild, restart, next mobility. These words are not only empty words, it's really the new normal. Yeah, so we have to restart the machine and doing with impact and mutualization and modernization and be agile in that way.
For me, it's also back to the basic word of curiosity. You know, we, from managers, agents, programmers, we end up managing the same type of artist. We program the same companies. Even as programs, as venues open up, I see a lot of the programs across the world, and they're still programming the same shows. Like, where's your curiosity? What have you not learned in the last 3 years? But I have to say that, you know, it is also curiosity and be open-minded. We are being split politically across the world. I live in a country where when I tell people I live in Saudi, I get two different responses. Why are you living there? Why do you like living there? Um, it was a challenge for me the first 2 years. It was hard for me to tell people that I like living there. I've had so many conversations, almost into a shouting match, where people don't believe what I tell them, that the country is trying to change. I mean, it is a real issue that we deal with at the theater, that there are companies that refuses to work with the kingdom. And I tell them, and I don't want to, I said, if you are willing to do business in China, why would you not want to deal with business in Saudi Arabia? I'm sorry, I will say that. So I'm going to ask you this question if you say you don't want to do business in Saudi, because I have so many people who come to, we deal with, it's a daily struggle that we have at the theater. And this is what I get. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. We are in the business of culture. It is through culture that we learn about each other. So if you're not curious, and it is, like you said, it's more than ever, it's not just about going into the most, you can't try to say you want to, have cultural exchange when you say, I don't want to go to a specific region. There's still border issues because of we can't go to certain places because of whatever, real border issues. But to say personally, I don't want to go to a specific place because of X, Y, and Z, I don't know. I'm putting that out there.
Very interesting indeed. I'd love to hear what our audience is feeling, or if there are any thoughts that are coming out. We have a mic. I do believe we have a mic that's going to be going around for whomever would like to ask a question. Or yes, we've got a mic right over there. Perfect. So please don't hesitate. You can. Yes, we have first person right over there.
My name is Salome Salazar. I'm from Ecuador. I manage a translation studio that helps artistic initiatives reach the Latin American audiences and create collaborations with Latin America. And thank you so much for this panel. I heard a few times the word international, the word diversity. We slightly touched upon the word decolonization, and this might be an uncomfortable question. So my question is, are we thinking about language accessibility in our programming? We are living in an English-dominated world. I was privileged enough to learn English and speak in your language. My native language is Spanish. So that would be my question. What are our efforts to make the arts more accessible by including other voices? And I would like to conclude with an invitation to, in your strategies and programming, include Latin American voices and audience.
Well, I guess that's not an issue for me because I travel a lot in Latin America. I invite lots of companies from Latin America, and all our performances are in Spanish or Catalan, which is another issue that maybe we should discuss here in Quebec. How do we deal with different identities, language, and so on? So I don't think that has to do with Latin America especially, but like international issue, nationalities. We also didn't touch that. I think it's not the moment to open this. But yes, we want to bring international work from anywhere in the world, in Sami, in English, in Spanish. That's our job, and I think nobody. Maybe there's a problem where to find that work. Like, for example, I travel every year to Chile, Santiago. I've been to Peru. I've been to many, many countries. Sometimes it's like how the country can organize themselves, or make sure that we get to know those fantastic artists, because we cannot travel. We can travel less than before. We have our colleagues. I do call some my colleagues from Ecuador or from Peru or from Argentina, and they tell me, look at this and this and these artists, because I cannot see thousands of artists. I have to somebody has to make the selection for me, and then I look at that selection. But that selection should be visible. And I also cannot go to thousands of platforms from all over the world of the different nationalities. So we have to maybe think how we organize that better, instead of traveling all the time all over the world. I can do mostly, and I'm a big festival, I cannot do more than 2 over ocean travels in the year. I don't want to. So we have to find ways of seeing, trusting, or meeting artists from different parts of the world, traveling less. And that's another issue.
I thank you very much. I mean, the heads up of there's language questions. I don't have a really good solution, but be aware of, I mean, that issue very well, because it's in Asia is many different languages. So I'm going to just share about good examples. Asia Producer Platform is the Asian Independent Producers Network. When we travel different city for 1 week camp, always issue of language. When we go to Indonesia, and in Japan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, fine, because they do speak English. So we provide a local translator. So in the conversation of the depth became very different about how we provide a translator. And we at the PAMS also, we had a round table, kind of 7 different round table. We thought just small conversation, but actually more numbers. We didn't provide English, a Korean translation. Many of Korean didn't come, and they complained because of accessibility things. So it's important is how we budgeting about translator, but it's not always kind of realistic. I mean, we had one experience about Hong Kong artists, Korean artists, theater making. Normally we have a casting of English speaker actors, but this time is we provide your own language, but we provide a translator in the theater process. That changes the whole dynamic of theater making things. So it's an important aspect about how we be aware of budgeting at an early stage if it is necessary. That's a sort of good question. Thank you.
Just quickly, I think it's also letting, on the theater side, I think also, and encouraging our audiences not to let language be a barrier for companies not to be able to come in. We're in this side of the world, English is the predominant, but we let that be a barrier to say we don't want to listen to or watch performances in a different language. But even elsewhere, I think elsewhere, listening to a production where English is not their first, it's not their first language. Even theater companies coming in, that's all in English. That's a big challenge. Even where we are at a theater, like we can't really do theater pieces yet because they're not used to seeing English subtitles. And I don't have an answer, like as a team, we don't have an answer yet, but how do we try to, get across that barrier? So I don't think there's no answer, but again, it all comes down to just keeping your open mind and try to not to say no immediately, but to say, is there a way? Can we find a way? Can we find a solution? Rather than telling ourselves no first.
Absolutely.
Je ne peux qu'être d'accord avec votre question, en fait d'accord que de partager. Comme il vient de dire, on ne peut pas avoir une seule solution, but plusieurs solutions. So just saying that I'm Francophone, as you can hear. I'm living in Montreal, Quebec, and French is the first language of Quebec. And I just want to add that for me, language is certainly a richness and really part of an identity. No one will doubt of this. And as there's no one answer, but certainly I would do whatever I can do to make sure language is part of the conversation. I like English because it's easiest to talk to everyone, but in the same way Charles has spoken in when he first took the microphone, I think it's important to never forget that, as I mentioned, a language is part of our identity, modern language especially, and this is something through whom we transmit tradition, values, heritage, and so it's definitely so many ways, but definitely we should think. It's not because we're talking in English today that is not something we have in mind. I'm sure, and that we can have that. And applause to your question. Voilà.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Merci d'avoir souligné aussi le commentaire sur les langues autochtones. So it would have been an interesting subject to broach as well. Yes, we had a question over there. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Emma. I'm a student here in Montreal. I work in the marketing industry, especially for the entertainment industry. And something that comes up just to mind is what are some of your strategies to pull younger generations to theater and to the arts? Because I think that at this my generation, I'm 25 years old. I was born in the industry. My mom's a promoter, so I was born in the theater. So it's very easy for me to understand it. I think that my generation do not feel pulled towards that as much. I think because we have access to TikTok and YouTube, like we can see everything from our couch. So, what are some of the strategies that you guys are implementing to pull those generations and not just,
I like that you put easy questions at the end of the talk. Let's say 2 or 3 each one, because I mean we all are worried about that. We all have strategies. We all have ideas. We all try.